A 14-year-old boy stands alone on a dead trail in the mountains, holding a medal caked in dried blood. He doesn't know what it means. He doesn't know the man who dropped it was running for his life through these woods 6 hours ago. He doesn't know that man has been officially dead for 15 years. But the biker who just pulled into the diner at the bottom of this hill, the one with the scar across his throat and the hollow eyes of a man still fighting a war nobody else remembers, he knows exactly what that medal is. And when he sees it, everything he buried is coming back. Every lie, every ghost, every brother he failed to save. This story will break you. If you stay until the very end, you'll understand why loyalty doesn't have an expiration date. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's ride. The town of Ash Hollow sat at the bottom of a valley that the rest of the world had forgotten how to find. It used to be a railroad junction. 30 years ago, the last freight company pulled its routes, and the tracks rusted into the earth like old stitches in skin nobody bothered to heal. The shops along Main Street went dark one by one. The school consolidated with the district 40 miles south. The post office stayed open 3 days a week, staffed by a woman in her 70s who still sorted letters by hand because nobody had taught her the new system, and nobody planned to. What remained was a gas station, a diner called Mabel's that smelled permanently of burned coffee and bacon grease, and a collection of houses scattered along dirt roads that led to nothing but timber country and abandoned mining claims. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere that mattered. Noah Mercer had lived here his entire 14 years, and he had never once been to a place that mattered. He woke before dawn the way he always did. Not from an alarm, but from the cold. The baseboard heater in his room had stopped working in March. His mother had called the landlord twice. The landlord had not called back. Noah had learned to sleep in 2 sweatshirts and a pair of wool socks he'd found at the Goodwill drop box behind the gas station. And he'd learned not to complain about it because complaining made his mother's face do the thing where it went very still and her eyes focused on something far away, something he couldn't see and she wouldn't name. He dressed in the dark, pulled on his boots, took an apple from the kitchen counter and ate it on the porch while the sky turned the color of wet cement. His mother was asleep on the couch again, not in her bedroom. The bedroom door had been closed since his father left 18 months ago. And Noah understood without being told that whatever was behind that door was something she couldn't face yet. Maybe not ever. He didn't wake her. He never woke her. Instead, he grabbed his backpack, the one with the broken zipper he'd fixed with a safety pin, and walked north along the gravel shoulder of Route 9 until the road curved into the trees and the trail system began. This was what Noah did. Every morning before school and every weekend from dawn until the light failed. He walked the old trails, the hiking paths that the Forest Service had stopped maintaining, the logging roads that led to clear cuts now thick with second-growth pine, the railroad grades where the ties had rotted and wildflowers pushed through the ballast. He collected things, not valuable things, not things anyone else wanted. Buttons, broken pocket knives, rusted railroad spikes, a cracked compass, a pair of reading glasses with one lens missing. The detritus of people who had passed through and left pieces of themselves behind without noticing. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed. He didn't know why. He only knew that finding something someone had lost made him feel like he mattered, even if the person who lost it would never know he existed. This morning the air was sharp. October had arrived overnight with a cruelty that felt personal. Frost on the grass, ice in the puddles, a wind that came down from the mountains carrying the smell of dead leaves and something metallic, something that tasted like old pennies when he breathed through his mouth. He followed the North Fork Trail for 2 miles, past the collapsed footbridge, past the place where a mudslide had taken out 30 yards of hillside last spring, past the rusted hulk of a truck that had been there so long the forest was growing through its cab. He almost missed it. A glint in the mud, half buried, dull bronze catching the first gray light of morning. Noah crouched, brushed the mud away with his fingers, pulled it free. It was a medal. Military, he thought, though it didn't look like anything he'd seen in movies or history books. It was heavy, custom-made maybe. One side bore an engraving he couldn't fully read. Letters worn smooth by years of being held, rubbed, carried close to someone's body. The other side had a symbol he didn't recognize. 2 crossed rifles beneath a set of wings, and below that, a number. Just a number. No name, no branch, no unit designation. The ribbon was torn. The pin on the back was bent at an angle that suggested force, like someone had ripped it from fabric in a hurry, and surrounding it, in the soft mud of the trail, were footprints. Fresh ones. Deep heel strikes. Long stride. Someone running. Not jogging, running. The kind of desperate, uneven gait that meant fear. Noah stood slowly, followed the prints with his eyes. They came from the south, from the direction of the old mining road, and they disappeared north into the thick timber where the trail narrowed to nothing. Beside the footprints, other marks. Wider boots. Multiple sets, moving in the same direction but spread apart, the way hunters space themselves when driving game toward a kill zone. And there, on the bark of a pine tree at shoulder height, a dark smear. Noah touched it. His fingers came away red-brown, not old, not dried completely. Hours, maybe. A few hours at most. His stomach tightened. "Someone lost this while running away," he whispered. To nobody, to the trees, to the silence that pressed against him from every direction like a held breath. He put the medal in his pocket. He should have gone home. He knew that. He should have gone home and told his mother, or called the sheriff's office, or done any of the things a reasonable person would do when they found blood and boot prints and a torn medal on a trail at 6 in the morning. But Noah Mercer was 14 years old in a town that had forgotten him, raised by a mother who was drowning in a grief she couldn't name, abandoned by a father who had driven away without looking in the rearview mirror. He had learned through 1,000 small lessons that calling for help meant waiting for help that wouldn't come. So instead of going home, he went to the diner. Mabel's opened at 5:30. It was the only place in Ash Hollow where you could sit indoors without being asked what you wanted. Because Mabel, whose real name was Diane, but nobody remembered why the sign said Mabel, would pour you coffee and leave you alone until you were ready to talk or ready to leave. Noah had $3 in his pocket, enough for a cup of hot chocolate and a seat by the window where the heater worked. He was halfway through the door when he heard them. Not the engines. Not yet. First the silence. The way every conversation in the diner stopped at once, like someone had pulled a plug. Then the rumble, low, deep. The kind of sound you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Multiple engines, heavy bikes, the unmistakable growl of V-twins rolling slow through a town that didn't get visitors. Noah stood in the doorway and watched them come. 7 motorcycles, riding in formation. Not the loose recreational cluster of weekend riders. This was tight, disciplined, deliberate. 2 abreast with a single lead bike, the way a military convoy moves through hostile territory. They wore black, leather, denim beneath it. Their cuts bore a patch Noah couldn't read from this distance, but the design was stark. A set of wings spread wide above a clenched fist holding a single burning torch. The Iron Vigil Motorcycle Club. They pulled into the gravel lot beside the diner, killed their engines one by one, in sequence, the way men do when they've been riding together long enough that even stopping is choreographed. Nobody inside the diner moved. The lead rider was the last to dismount. He was tall. Not the kind of tall that came from genetics alone. This was the height of a man who refused to let the world push him into a smaller shape. Late 40s. Gray threaded through dark hair that he wore pushed back from a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. A nose broken at least twice, a jaw that could have been carved from railroad tie, and a scar that ran from beneath his left ear down across his throat and disappeared into the collar of his jacket. His eyes were the problem. Not cold, not cruel. Worse than that. Empty. The kind of empty that happens when a man has seen something that burned out every soft thing inside him and left nothing but the machinery of staying alive. Ryder Callahan pushed through the door of Mabel's like he owned it. Not with arrogance, with the simple, terrifying certainty of a man who had walked into worse places and walked out carrying the bodies of friends. Behind him, 6 men filed in. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They found seats the way soldiers find cover, instinctively, with their backs to walls and their eyes on exits. Diane brought coffee without being asked. Her hands were steady. She'd been pouring coffee for strangers in this town for 31 years, and she had learned that the ones who looked dangerous were usually less trouble than the ones who looked polite. Ryder sat at the counter, wrapped both hands around the mug, stared at the coffee the way a man stares at a fire when he's trying not to think about what's burning. Noah watched from his table by the window. He should have looked away. He knew that. You don't stare at men like this. You don't draw their attention. You make yourself small and quiet and forgettable, the way Noah had spent his entire life learning to do. But the metal in his pocket felt heavy, heavier than it should have been. And something, not courage, nothing as noble as that, just the desperate, irrational need to give someone the thing they had lost, made him stand up. He walked to the counter. Ryder didn't look at him. "Excuse me," Noah said. His voice was thin. He hated how thin it sounded. Ryder's eyes moved, not his head, just his eyes. They found Noah the way a scope finds a target. Quick, precise, already calculating distance and threat level before the conscious mind catches up. "Yeah." One word. Low. Rough. A voice that had been shouting orders over gunfire and screaming engines for decades and had never fully recovered. Noah reached into his pocket, pulled out the metal, set it on the counter between them. "I found this on the North Fork Trail this morning. Someone lost it. I think someone dropped it while they were running." Ryder looked at the metal. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then something did. It started in his hands, a tremor, subtle enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Noah noticed, because Noah spent his life watching people, their hands, their faces, the way they held their bodies when they were trying not to feel something. And he saw the tremor move from Ryder's hands up through his arms and into his shoulders. And he saw the man's jaw lock so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. Ryder picked up the metal, turned it over, read the number on the back. And Noah watched something happen to Ryder Callahan's face that he would never forget for the rest of his life. The emptiness cracked, not like ice breaking on a pond, like a dam failing, like something enormous and terrible and held back for years suddenly forcing its way through a wall that was never meant to hold it. "Where?" Ryder's voice had changed. It wasn't rough anymore. It was something else, something that sounded like a wound. "Where exactly did you find this?" "North Fork Trail, 2 miles past the collapsed bridge. There were footprints, and blood." Ryder stood up so fast the stool scraped back across the tile and hit the wall behind him. Every man in the diner wearing leather turned to look at him. Every one of them read his face. Every one of them went still. Deacon. The name was enough. A man at the corner table, broad, bearded, with hands like engine blocks and eyes that had seen the same war Ryder had, stood without a word. "Get Hatch. Get Sullivan. Get everyone one." "What is it?" Ryder held up the metal. His hand was shaking. The man who had walked into this diner like nothing in the world could touch him was standing at the counter with tears running down a face made of scar tissue and silence, holding a piece of bronze between his fingers like it was the only proof that something he had mourned for 15 years was still alive. "It's Ethan's." Deacon's face changed. Ryder, that's not possible. Cross is dead. He's been dead since..." "I know what we were told. I know what the file said. I know what they put on the wall. I am looking at his medal, Deacon, the custom one, the one with the number. There is nobody else on this earth who has this medal." Silence. The kind that fills a room when every person in it understands that the world just shifted beneath their feet, and nothing that comes next will be the same as what came before. Deacon moved, didn't ask another question, walked out the door and started making calls before his boots hit the gravel. Ryder turned to Noah. The boy hadn't moved. He stood at the counter with his hands at his sides and his eyes wide, not with fear, with the look of someone who has spent his entire life being invisible and has just been seen for the first time. "What's your name?" "Noah." "Noah, you're going to show me exactly where you found this, every step, every mark in the dirt, every broken branch. Can you do that?" It wasn't really a question. Noah understood that. But he also understood something else. Something he couldn't have articulated but felt in his bones, the way you feel thunder before you hear it. This man needed him, not the way his mother needed him, as a reminder of a life that had collapsed, not the way his teachers needed him, as a quiet body filling a seat. This man needed him the way one human being needs another when something essential has been lost, and the only way to find it leads through someone else's knowledge. Yes, Noah said, I can do that. They rode out of Ash Hollow 20 minutes later. Noah on the back of Ryder's bike, his arms wrapped around the man's waist, the metal back in Ryder's chest pocket pressed against whatever was left of his heart. The trail was exactly as Noah had left it. Worse, actually. In the 2 hours since Noah had been there, more tracks had appeared. Vehicle tracks this time. Heavy tires. The kind that belonged to SUVs or tactical vehicles, cutting deep ruts into the mud where the trail met the logging road. Ryder crouched beside the blood smear on the pine tree, touched it the way Noah had, looked at his fingers. His face was a locked room. Multiple pursuers, Sullivan said from behind him. Sullivan was the club's tracker, a former Army Ranger who had spent 3 tours reading footprints in places where misreading them meant dying. At least 4. Spread patterns suggest coordinated pursuit. They were driving him north toward the old mining district. Meridian territory, Hatch said quietly. Hatch was older than the rest. White beard, calm eyes. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he'd learned decades ago that quiet words from the right mouth carried more weight than shouting. The Meridian Group's been running security contracts out of those old mine facilities for years. Private military. Nobody goes up there. Somebody did, Ryder said. Somebody went up there bleeding and running and dropped this metal on purpose. On purpose? Ryder stood, looked north. The mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky that was rapidly filling with clouds, dark and heavy, the kind that brought early snow to elevations above 4,000 feet. Ethan Cross was the most disciplined operator I ever served with. He didn't drop things. He didn't lose things. He didn't make mistakes under pressure. If this metal was on that trail, he put it there. He put it there because he knew, somehow, after 15 years, that I would find it. Or that someone would find it and bring it to you, Deacon said. Everyone looked at Noah. The boy stood at the edge of the trail with his hands in his pockets, mud on his boots, frost in his hair, looking back at 7 men who carried the weight of wars on their shoulders and the scars of betrayal on their skin. I just pick up things people lose, Noah said quietly. That's all I do. Ryder watched the boy for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. Men like Ryder didn't do softness, but recognition. The recognition of someone who understood what it meant to move through the world, picking up pieces that other people had discarded and trying to make them matter. You did good, Noah. 3 words. But Noah felt them land somewhere inside his chest like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples outward into places that hadn't been touched in years. They left Noah at the trailhead with Hatch, who stayed behind with a burner phone and instructions to call if any vehicles came down the logging road. Noah wanted to go with them. He didn't say so. He didn't have to. Hatch saw it in his face. You've done your part, Hatch said. Now you wait. Waiting is harder than fighting. That's something nobody tells you when you're young. Is the man who lost the medal? Is he okay? Hatch looked north, toward the mountains where Ryder and the others had disappeared into the timber. I don't know, he said. I haven't known for 15 years. And there it was, the thing nobody had said out loud, the weight that hung over every man who wore the Iron Vigil patch this morning. Ethan Cross had been declared dead a decade and a half ago. His name was on a memorial wall. His file was closed. His family, if he had family, had been given a folded flag and a story that was almost certainly a lie. And now a 14-year-old boy with a broken backpack and $3 in his pocket had found proof that the lie was exactly that. A lie. Ryder pushed deeper into the mountains. The trail narrowed, the trees thickened. The sky disappeared behind a canopy of pine and fir that turned the forest floor into permanent twilight. The blood trail was intermittent but readable. Whoever was bleeding was moving fast and trying to hide it, wiping against trees, stepping in streams to wash the marks. But Sullivan read the signs the way a musician reads sheet music, without hesitation, without doubt. He's good, Sullivan said. Whoever he is, he's trained. This is evasion protocol, standard SERE techniques. He's been doing this a while. He's been doing this for 15 years, Ryder said. They followed the trail for 6 miles. The elevation gained 1,000 feet. The temperature dropped. The wind came harder, carrying flakes of early snow that melted against their skin and left cold trails like tears on their faces. At the 7-mile mark, the trail ended. Not faded, not lost. Ended, deliberately. The tracks walked straight into a creek, and on the other side there was nothing. No prints, no blood, no broken branches. As if the person being pursued had simply ceased to exist. Sullivan spent 20 minutes circling, found nothing. "He went to ground," Sullivan said, "somewhere within a half-mile radius. He's hiding, and he's good enough at it that we're not going to find him by looking." Ryder stood in the creek. The water was ankle-deep and cold enough to hurt. He looked up at the mountains above him. The abandoned mining infrastructure was visible now. Rusted conveyor frames, collapsed head frames, the dark mouths of tunnel entrances that hadn't been used in decades. Except one of them had been used recently. He could see it. A track in the scree, a rock recently displaced, a cable that shouldn't have been taut but was, running from a dead power pole into the darkness of a mine adit that the map said had been sealed in 1987. "He's in there," Ryder said. "So is whatever he's running from," Deacon said. Ryder looked at Deacon, looked at Sullivan, looked at the men who had followed him into this forest without question, who had left their bikes and their breakfast and their ordinary morning because he had held up a dead man's medal and asked them to ride. "I lost him once," Ryder said. "I was 300 meters away when the compound went up. I heard the explosion. I felt the heat, and I spent 6 hours digging through rubble with my bare hands looking for a body that wasn't there. They told me he was dead. They told me the remains were unrecoverable. They told me to accept it. I accepted it because I didn't have a choice." He held up the medal. "Now I have a choice." Deacon pulled his weapon, checked the magazine, looked at Ryder with the expression of a man who had made this decision a long time ago and was only waiting for the word. "Then let's go get your brother." They moved toward the mine entrance. The snow was falling harder now. The wind carried sounds from deeper in the mountains, engine noise maybe, or the groan of old metal under stress, or something else entirely, something that might have been a voice calling from a very long distance, or might have been nothing at all. Behind them, back at the trailhead, Noah sat on a fallen log with Hatch and watched the snow begin to cover the footprints. "Hatch?" "Yeah." "What happens if they don't find him?" The old man was quiet for a long time. The snow fell, the forest creaked. Somewhere a bird called once and went silent. "Then Ryder walks back down this mountain carrying the same ghost he's been carrying for 15 years, only heavier, because now he knows the ghost was real." Noah pulled his jacket tighter. The metal was gone from his pocket, but the weight of it was still there, pressed into his memory like a handprint in wet concrete. Somewhere above them, in the dark throat of an abandoned mine, Ryder Callahan stepped into the blackness, with his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through air that tasted like rust and old stone, and the particular silence that exists in places where men have hidden things they never wanted found. And from deep inside that silence, barely audible over the sound of his own breathing and the hammer of his own heart, came a sound. A tap. Then another. Then a pattern. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. A signal Ryder hadn't heard in 15 years. A signal only 2 men in the world knew. His light found the darkness ahead. His boots found the stone beneath him. His hand found the cold steel of the metal in his pocket. And somewhere in the black space beyond his light, Ethan Cross, the ghost, the dead man, the brother who had never stopped fighting even after the world declared him finished, was waiting for the only person he had left to trust. Ryder walked deeper. The mountains swallowed him whole. The signal came again. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. Ryder stopped breathing, held the flashlight steady with a hand that refused to stop shaking. The beam cut a white line through dust that hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had gone out years ago and never fully cleared. The tunnel was narrower than it looked from outside. Timber supports bowed under the weight of the mountain above them, some cracked, some replaced with steel braces that were newer, years newer, not decades, bolted into the rock with hardware that didn't belong in a mine sealed since 1987. Someone had been maintaining this place. Someone had been using it. Ryder, Deacon's voice behind him, low, the kind of low that meant he'd seen the same thing and was already doing the math. Those braces, those are military-grade supports. This isn't some squatter's hideout. I know. We don't know what's in there. I know that too. So we're just walking in. Ryder didn't answer. He walked. The darkness pressed against his light like something alive, something that didn't want to be pushed back. The air got colder. The tunnel curved left, then dropped at an angle that put strain on his knees, and the sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere ahead. Irregular, arrhythmic, like a clock that had lost track of time. 40 meters in, 60, 80. The tapping stopped. Ryder stopped with it, listened. Behind him, Sullivan and Deacon and two others, Maddox and a younger rider named Cole, stood in a line with their lights carving separate wounds into the dark. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were breathing and the drip and the deep geological groan of a mountain settling against itself. Then a voice, thin, wrecked. The voice of a man who hadn't spoken to another human being in weeks, maybe months, and whose throat had forgotten how to shape words without pain. If you're here to kill me, you're late. Ryder closed his eyes, opened them. He knew that voice. 15 years had stripped it down to wire and rust, but he knew it the way you know your own name. Not by thinking, by being. Ethan. Silence. Ethan. It's Ryder. More silence. Then a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob, or might have been something that didn't have a name because it lived in the space between the two where language breaks down, and all that's left is the raw noise of a human being encountering something they had stopped believing was possible. Prove it. Ryder reached into his pocket, pulled out the metal, held it in the beam of his flashlight so the bronze caught the light, and threw it against the tunnel walls. Firebase Kestrel, Ryder said, March 9th. You gave me this metal the night before the compound hit and told me to hold it because your vest pocket had a hole in it. I told you to sew the pocket. You told me to mind my own business. Then you said, I said, if I don't come back, melt it down and make a bullet. At least then I'll be useful. Ryder's jaw locked. The tears were back. He didn't fight them. There was no point. A shape moved in the darkness beyond his light, slowly, painfully. The sound of a body dragging itself against stone, of fabric scraping rock, of breathing that came in short, shallow pulls like each one cost something that couldn't be repaid. Ethan Cross moved into the light. He looked like a man the world had tried to erase, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, a beard that had gone gray in patches. His left arm was bound to his chest with a makeshift sling torn from what looked like a military-grade rain jacket. His right hand was wrapped in cloth stained dark. His eyes, those eyes that Ryder remembered as sharp, bright, always calculating 3 moves ahead, were sunken and ringed with exhaustion so deep it looked permanent, but alive, breathing, standing, barely, in a mine shaft under a mountain in a town that nobody remembered 15 years after the world had written him off as collateral damage. You look terrible, Ryder said. You look old, Ethan said. Ryder crossed the distance in 4 steps, caught Ethan as the man's legs gave out, held him, not gently. There was nothing gentle about 2 men who had survived the same war gripping each other in the dark, but completely. The way you hold something you thought was gone and find you were wrong, and the relief is so enormous it becomes its own kind of pain. I went back, Ryder said into Ethan's shoulder. I dug for 6 hours. They had to drag me out. I know, I watched from the tree line. I couldn't. They told me if I made contact, they'd kill everyone on the recovery team. So I watched you dig, and I walked away. Ryder pulled back, looked at Ethan's face. The words landed like rounds impacting at close range. You felt the shock before you felt the damage. You were alive. You were right there. And you let me believe I let you survive. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a conversation permanently. Deacon stood behind Ryder with his flashlight pointed at the ground, his face unreadable. Sullivan hadn't moved. Maddox and Cole exchanged a look that said neither of them understood what they were witnessing, but both of them understood it was not something to interrupt. Ethan swayed. Ryder steadied him, lowered him to a rock ledge along the tunnel wall, pulled a water bottle from his pack and held it while Ethan drank in small, careful sips. "How bad?" Ryder said. "2 ribs, left shoulder dislocated. I said it myself, but it's not right. Lacerations on my hands from the climb. Nothing that'll kill me today." "What will kill you today?" Ethan's eyes moved to the tunnel entrance behind them. Beyond it, the mountain. Beyond that, the mining district where the vehicle tracks had come from. Meridian Defense Solutions, private military contractor. They've been operating out of the old Ash Hollow mining complex for approximately 9 years. Off books. No oversight. They run logistics for people who can't afford to have logistics. Arms transfers, prisoner transport, evidence disposal. They are very good at making people disappear. And they're making you disappear. They've been trying. I've been harder to erase than most. Deacon stepped forward. His voice was measured, but his eyes were not. "Hold on. Back up. You've been alive for 15 years. 15 years, Cross." Ryder carried a folded flag to your mother's house, stood on her porch while she screamed. "He hasn't slept through the night since Firebase Kestrel. And you're telling us you were alive the whole time because... what? Because you were collecting evidence?" Ethan looked at Deacon the way a surgeon looks at a wound, with detachment that was itself a form of pain. "Because the people who destroyed Kestrel are the same people running Meridian, the same people who sold classified intelligence that got 12 Americans killed, the same people who pocketed $37 million in reconstruction funds while the villages they were supposed to rebuild burned. I saw the proof. I had the proof. And I knew that if I surfaced, they would bury it and bury me and bury everyone who ever touched it. So you played dead. I became dead. There's a difference. Playing dead is a trick. Becoming dead is a life. I've had 11 identities in 15 years. I've lived in basements, storage units, the back rooms of churches in countries I can't name. I learned to cut my own hair, set my own bones, make my own documents. I learned to eat cold food in the dark and sleep in 2-hour intervals and never tell a living soul my real name." He paused. The breathing was worse now. Each inhale had a hitch in it, a catch, like his lungs were negotiating with his broken ribs over how much air they'd allow. "I was going to die anonymous. I accepted that. But 6 days ago, Meridian found my last safe house. I don't know how. A facial recognition hit, maybe? A database match? It doesn't matter. They came in the night. I had 90 seconds to grab the evidence and run." "The evidence," Ryder said. Ethan pointed at the metal in Ryder's hand. "Inside the metal, microchip soldered beneath the backing plate, everything. 15 years of evidence. Transaction records, communications, kill orders, names, dates, proof that would burn Meridian and every government official who enabled them." Ryder looked at the metal in his hand. The weight of it had changed. It wasn't just bronze anymore. It was a weapon. "You could have mailed it, sent it to a reporter, dropped it at a federal building." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You don't understand how deep this goes. Meridian has people inside every agency. DOJ, FBI, Pentagon. Every channel I could use to transmit this evidence has someone on the other end who would destroy it before it reached the right desk. I've tried 3 times. Each time, the person I trusted ended up dead within a week." "So you dropped it on a hiking trail?" "I dropped it where I knew it would be found by someone who wasn't connected to any of this. A civilian, a random person. And I dropped it in Ash Hollow because..." He stopped, looked at Ryder. The expression on his face was something Noah would have recognized. The look of a man laying down the last card in his hand and praying it was enough. "Because I knew you'd be riding through." Ryder went still. "How?" "Because I've been tracking you, from a distance, for years. I know your routes. I know the Iron Vigil rides Highway 9 every October for the Veterans Memorial Run to Colton. I know you stop in Ash Hollow for breakfast at the diner. I've watched you pass through this town 4 times. I never made contact. I couldn't risk it. But this time I was out of options, so I ran north, knowing the metal would end up in the hands of someone in Ash Hollow, knowing you'd be passing through within 48 hours. It was the last play I had. You gambled my life on a trail and a timetable. I gambled my death on the only man I still trust. Ryder stood up, walked 3 steps into the dark, stood there with his back to everyone. His flashlight pointed at the ground, making a circle of light around his boots that looked like a spotlight on a stage where no one wanted to perform. Deacon moved beside him, spoke low enough that the others couldn't hear. Ryder, this is wrong. I know. I don't mean the situation. I mean him. 15 years. He watched you dig through rubble. He watched his mother grieve. He let you carry that weight for 15 years. And now he shows up broken and bleeding and hands you a medal full of evidence and expects you to, what, fix it? Fight for him? After what he did? He didn't do it to hurt me. The damage is the same whether he meant it or not. Ryder turned, looked at Deacon. In the flashlight glow, their faces were half shadow, half light, like men standing on the border between two versions of reality and trying to decide which one to step into. What would you have done, Ryder said, if you had proof that the people who killed your brothers were still operating, still profiting, still free, and the only way to stop them was to become a ghost? What would you have done? Deacon didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. Sullivan appeared from deeper in the tunnel. He'd been scouting ahead while the others talked. His face was tight. We've got a problem. What kind? The kind that's parked a quarter-mile north of here with 3 vehicles and heat signatures on portable scanners. They know this mine system. They've been searching the entrances methodically. They're 2 shafts over and working this direction. Ethan's eyes closed, opened. The resignation in them was the resignation of a man who had been running for a very long time and had finally run out of distance. They'll have the southern exit covered by now. Standard containment. Push from one end, seal the other. I've seen them do it before. How many? Ryder asked Sullivan. At least 8, maybe 12. Armed, professional. These aren't local security guards playing soldier, Ryder. These are operators. Former military? Current, probably. Meridian recruits from special operations, Tier 1 washouts, guys who couldn't hack the discipline but kept the skills. They're dangerous and they don't care about collateral. Ryder looked at his people. Deacon, Sullivan, Maddox, Cole, 4 men, 4 weapons between them, sidearms, nothing more. No tactical gear. No communications equipment beyond cell phones that had lost signal 3 miles back. They'd ridden out here for breakfast and found a war. We need to move Ethan, now, back down the south shaft, out the way we came in, down the mountain to what? Deacon cut in. To the bikes? We put a half-dead man on the back of a motorcycle and ride down a logging road in the snow. And then what? Call the cops? The same cops who've never once set foot in the Meridian compound despite it being an active military installation in their jurisdiction? You think that's an accident? Then what do you suggest? I suggest we think about what we're actually doing here. We rode in to find a dead man. We found him alive. Good. Now we need to get out, get somewhere with signal, and make calls. Real calls. Federal, not local. Ethan just told you the federal agencies are compromised. And Ethan just told you he's been a ghost for 15 years. No offense, Cross, but a man who's been living under false identities since I was getting my first gray hairs doesn't get to be the only source of intelligence here. How do we know any of this is real? How do we know that Chip has what he says it has? How do we know Meridian is what he says it is? We're standing in a mine shaft in the dark, taking the word of a man who faked his own death and let his best friend suffer for it. The words hung in the air like the dust, suspended, visible, impossible to ignore. Ethan didn't flinch. He looked at Deacon with an expression that wasn't anger or hurt, but something older, acceptance. The kind a man develops when he's heard every possible objection to his existence and has stopped trying to argue against them. You're right to doubt me, Ethan said. I would. Then give me something, Deacon said. Something I can verify. Something that proves this isn't what? A trap? A hallucination? A dead man's fantasy? Yeah, any of those. Ethan reached into the pocket of his jacket with his good hand, pulled out a phone. Not a smartphone. An old model, the kind you buy at a gas station for $20 and load with minutes. He tapped the screen 3 times and held it out. Meridian's internal communications. Encrypted, but I broke the cipher 18 months ago. Scroll down. You'll find an order dated 6 days ago. It uses a code phrase, glass canopy. That's their designation for an elimination operation. The target identifier matches the number on the back of my medal. Deacon took the phone. Read. His face changed, not all at once. In stages, like a man walking through rooms in a house he doesn't want to be in, each door revealing something worse than the last. This is real, he said. It's been real for 15 years. This order references. There are names here I recognize, government names, people who testified at the Kestrel inquiry, people who told us the compound failure was an equipment malfunction. It wasn't an equipment malfunction. I know that now. You should have known it then. The temperature in the tunnel dropped 10 degrees. Not physically, emotionally. Something cracked between the men in that narrow space, something that had been holding them together in the shape of a shared purpose. And through the crack came the cold air of old grievances and unanswered questions, and the particular kind of fury that comes from learning you were lied to by people you were willing to die for. We all should have known, Ryder said. His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who was holding rage at arm's length with both hands and watching it snarl. We should have pushed harder, asked more questions, refused to accept the official story. But we didn't. Because we were tired, because we were grieving, because it was easier to bury a friend than to fight the machine that killed him. Ryder, don't tell me I couldn't have known. I could have. I chose not to. That's a different thing. Sullivan's hand went up. Everyone went silent. Footsteps. Not inside the tunnel, above it, on the surface, the crunch of boots on gravel and frozen ground, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Then a voice, muffled by rock but audible. A radio voice. Clipped. Professional. Shaft 7 clear. Moving to shaft 9. Copy. Shaft 9 was where they were standing. Sullivan killed his flashlight. The others followed. Darkness swallowed them whole. The only light came from the faint gray glow of the entrance behind them, 100 meters back, rapidly dimming as the snowfall thickened outside. We're out of time, Ethan whispered. There's a passage, deeper in. It connects to the old ore processing facility on the east face. I've used it before, but it's tight, and it's a quarter-mile through darkness. Can you walk it? Ryder said. I can crawl it if I have to. You won't have to. Ryder turned in the dark, found Ethan by sound, by the rasp of his breathing, got under his good arm, took his weight, felt the bones too close to the skin, the heat of fever coming off him, the tremor of a body running on nothing but willpower and the chemical remnants of adrenaline. Deacon. Point. Sullivan. Rear. Maddox, Cole. Cover our 6. No lights until we're past the junction. Ryder. Deacon's voice in the dark. If they're in shaft 9 in the next 10 minutes, they'll find our tracks. They'll know someone was here. And they'll seal every exit in this mountain. Then we have 9 minutes. That's not what I mean. I mean, this goes one of two ways. We get out of this mine with Cross and his evidence, and we blow this wide open. Or we get trapped in here with 8 to 12 armed operators between us and daylight. There is no middle ground. There is no do-over. Whatever we decide in the next 30 seconds, we live with. Silence. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of men who have already decided and are waiting for the signal to move. I lived with losing him for 15 years, Ryder said. I'm not doing it twice. They moved. Into the dark. Into the mountain. Away from the entrance where flashlight beams were beginning to sweep the first 20 meters of shaft 9. Away from the sound of boots and radio chatter and the mechanical precision of men who were paid to find people and make them disappear. Ethan leaned against Ryder. Each step cost him. Each breath was a negotiation between his body and his will. The passage narrowed, the ceiling dropped, the air turned thick and wet and tasted like iron and old stone and the buried patience of a mountain that had swallowed men before and felt nothing about it. Behind them, a flashlight beam appeared at the shaft 9 entrance. A voice. Fresh tracks. Recent. Multiple. Another voice. Glass canopy is active. All units converge. Ryder didn't look back. He couldn't. The passage was too narrow to turn. He could only move forward, deeper into the dark, carrying a man who had been dead for 15 years, and was now the most dangerous person alive to the most powerful people in the room. The medal was in his pocket. The evidence was in the medal. The truth was in the evidence, and the mountain was closing around them like a fist. Ahead, nothing but blackness. Behind, the sound of men who would kill everyone in this tunnel for the contents of a bronze disc the size of a $50. Ryder shifted Ethan's weight, felt the man's grip tighten on his shoulder, felt beneath the layers of exhaustion and pain and 15 years of running, something that was still unbroken, still sharp, still fighting. "Stay with me," Ryder said. "I've been staying with you for 15 years, Ethan said. "You just didn't know it." The passage dropped. The darkness deepened. And somewhere behind them, in the shaft they had just left, the radio crackled with the words that meant the world they were standing in had officially ceased to have exits. "All shafts sealed. Nobody leaves this mountain." Ryder kept walking, into the dark, into the only direction that was left. The passage was 3 feet wide and shrinking. Ryder moved sideways, his shoulder scraping stone, Ethan's weight pulling against him like an anchor dragging across a seabed. The darkness was absolute, not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where shapes still existed in memory, but the darkness of deep earth, the kind that pressed against your open eyes and made them doubt they were open at all. Sullivan counted steps behind them. Old habit, ranger habit. When you couldn't see, you measured. When you couldn't measure, you counted. When you couldn't count, you were already dead. 212, Sullivan whispered. 213. "How far?" Deacon said from the front. He was leading by touch, his left hand against the wall, his right holding a weapon he couldn't aim because there was nothing to see. "Quarter mile," Ethan breathed. "Maybe less." The passage opens into the ore processing level. There's a staging area, equipment room, multiple exits to the surface. "Multiple exits that Meridian knows about," Maddox said. "Yes. So we're walking from one trap into another. We're walking from a sealed shaft into a facility with options. Options are better than a dead end." Nobody argued. There was nothing to argue with. The math was simple. Behind them, armed men moving through Shaft 9. Ahead, a facility controlled by the people hunting Ethan. Between the two, 5 bikers and a broken man in a passage that smelled like wet iron and old death, and a metal carrying evidence that could burn an empire to the ground. The ceiling dropped again. Ryder ducked, felt Ethan try to fold his injured body lower and heard the sound, a sharp, involuntary gasp that the man cut off with his teeth, literally biting down on the noise before it could escape. "You good?" "Define good." "Alive." "Then I'm exceptional." The passage leveled, widened, and then, ahead, not light exactly, but the absence of total darkness. A shift in the quality of the black, from solid to permeable, as if the air ahead held memory of illumination even if none currently existed. Deacon stopped, raised a fist. Everyone stopped behind him. A sound, distant but distinct. Not footsteps, not voices. The hum of a generator. Low, steady, mechanical. The kind of sound that meant power, which meant equipment, which meant occupation. "The facility is active," Deacon said. "Parts of it," Ethan said. "Meridian uses the processing level for staging. Vehicles, supplies, communications equipment. The upper levels are abandoned. At least they were 6 months ago when I last mapped it." "You mapped it." "I mapped everything within 30 miles of Ash Hollow. Every tunnel, every access road, every line of sight. I've been preparing for this for 3 years." "Preparing for what exactly?" Deacon said. "For getting caught? For getting found. There's a difference." The passage opened into a chamber, not large, maybe 20 feet across, with a low ceiling supported by steel beams and a floor of compacted earth. The generator sound was louder here, coming from somewhere below and to the east. A faint glow leaked through cracks in a metal door set into the far wall. Not electric light, but the green-white pulse of emergency lighting, the kind that ran on battery backup. Ryder eased Ethan onto the ground. The man leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, and in the faint green glow that seeped through the door cracks, Ryder saw the full extent of what 15 years of running had done. It wasn't just the injuries, it was the architecture of the man himself, the way his body had been rebuilt around damage, compensating, adjusting, rerouting, the way a tree grows around a fence wire embedded in its trunk. Ethan Cross hadn't aged. He'd been eroded. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said, eyes still closed. "Before we go through that door, before whatever happens next, then tell me. Firebase Kestrel wasn't an accident. It wasn't equipment failure. It wasn't even an attack from outside. You said that. Meridian gave the order, but the order went through our chain of command, through people we reported to, people who signed our deployment papers and shook our hands and called us heroes at the memorial." Ryder felt something cold settle into his chest. Not surprise, something worse. The feeling of a thing you always suspected but never let yourself look at directly, the way you don't look at the sun because you know it'll burn. "Who?" "Colonel Marcus Vane." The name detonated in the silence like a grenade with a delayed fuse. Ryder didn't move, didn't breathe. His hands, which had been steady through the entire march through the tunnel, began to shake again. "Vane commanded Kestrel. Vane sold Kestrel. He traded our operational intelligence to Meridian's predecessor, a contractor called Obsidian Ridge, in exchange for a consulting position worth $2 million a year after his retirement. The intel compromise led to the compound breach. 12 men died. I survived because I was on the perimeter running a comm check when the explosion happened. I saw Vane's encrypted communications on a damaged laptop in the rubble. That's when I knew. Vane gave the eulogy. I know. Vane gave the eulogy at the memorial. He stood at a podium and talked about sacrifice and duty and the cost of freedom. He looked at the families. He looked at the mothers. He cried. I know, Ryder. He cried in front of the mothers of the men he killed. Yes. Ryder stood up, walked to the far wall, put both hands flat against the stone and leaned into it, arms locked, head down, breathing through his mouth. The posture of a man absorbing impact. The posture of a man who has been hit so hard in a place so deep that the pain hasn't reached the surface yet, and when it does, it's going to reshape everything. Deacon watched him. Sullivan watched him. Maddox and Cole stood in the shadows with the look of soldiers witnessing a commanding officer receive news that changes the nature of the mission. Nobody spoke. Nobody tried to comfort him. These were men who understood that some wounds need space, not touch. Where's Vane now? Ryder said to the wall. Retired. Lives in Virginia. Sits on the board of 3 defense contractors, one of which is Meridian's parent company. He plays golf. He has grandchildren. He goes to the memorial every year and lays a wreath for the men whose deaths he paid for. Is he on the chip? Every transaction, every communication, every order he signed, including the termination order for a sergeant named David Watts, who tried to file an internal report in 2014. Watts was found dead in his apartment. Ruled a suicide. It wasn't. I knew Watts. Everyone knew Watts. He was at the memorial, the first one. He stood next to me. And 6 months later, he started asking questions about the equipment failure report. And 2 months after that, he was dead. That's when I understood the shape of what I was dealing with. This isn't a rogue contractor, Ryder. This is an ecosystem. Military, intelligence, corporate, law enforcement. They're interconnected. They protect each other. They've been protecting each other for 20 years. Ryder pushed off the wall, turned. His face was different now. The emptiness from the diner, the hollow, burned-out look of a man who had stopped fighting something he couldn't name, was gone. In its place was something harder, colder, the face of a man who had just been given a target after years of shooting at ghosts. The chip in the metal. Everything is on it? Everything. Names, bank accounts, operational orders, kill authorizations, communication intercepts. Enough to bring federal indictments against 11 people, including Vane, 2 sitting members of a Senate Oversight Committee, and the current CEO of Meridian. Senators, Deacon said. Did I stutter? Deacon crossed his arms. The motion was deliberate. A man physically containing himself, folding his body into a smaller, tighter shape because the alternative was expansion, and expansion at this moment meant violence. You're telling us that 2 United States senators were involved in the murder of American servicemen. I'm telling you they took money from a company that traded American lives for defense contracts, and when the bodies started accumulating, they ensured the investigations went nowhere. Whether that makes them murderers or accessories is a question for a courtroom I may never see the inside of. And you've been carrying this alone. I carry it lighter than the dead. The words stopped the room cold. Sullivan broke the silence. We can't stay here. If they're sweeping the shafts, they'll reach this junction within the hour. We need to move through the facility, find an exit they haven't sealed, and get off this mountain. And then what? Maddox said. He'd been quiet until now. A young rider, mid-20s, with the careful eyes of a man who had served 2 tours and come home to find that home no longer fit. We walk into a federal building and hand them a medal? Tell them a dead man gave it to us in a mine? Who takes that call? Who doesn't just put us in a room and lose the key? I have contacts, Ethan said. 2 people, one at the Inspector General's office, one at a media organization, not mainstream, she thought, investigative. The kind that doesn't fold under pressure. If I can get a signal, a real signal, satellite or hardline, I can transmit the chip contents to both simultaneously. Once it's in 2 places, it can't be contained. The story becomes too big to bury. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else for 15 years. Ryder looked at the door. The green light pulsed behind it like a heartbeat. What's on the other side? The ore processing level. Main floor is approximately 200 meters long, 60 wide. Heavy industrial equipment, conveyors, crushers, sorting tables. Most of it's been cleared out. Meridian uses the floor space for vehicle staging. Last time I was in there, they had 4 to 6 SUVs and a mobile communications unit. A comms unit. Yes. With satellite uplink capability. Yes. So the transmitter we need is inside the facility controlled by the people trying to kill you. That's what I said. Ryder almost laughed. The sound that came out wasn't humor. It was the noise a man makes when absurdity reaches a pitch so high it bypasses comedy and becomes something else. Something dangerous. Something that tastes like the last breath before a decision that can't be undone. Deacon? Yeah. You still think this might not be real? Deacon looked at the phone he was still holding. The burner with Meridian's encrypted communications on its cracked screen. Looked at Ethan. Looked at the door. I think it's real, Deacon said slowly. And I think that's worse. Because if this is real, then the men on the other side of that door aren't just hired guns chasing a fugitive. They're the cleanup crew for a conspiracy that's been running longer than some of us have been writing. And cleanup crews don't leave witnesses. They never have, Ethan said. Watts, a journalist named Catherine Aldridge in 2016, a Pentagon auditor named Raymond Cho in 2019, a retired master sergeant named Billy Kane who I tried to contact in 2021. All dead, all ruled natural causes or suicide, all people who touched this case and were erased. The names fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples, each one expanding outward into a larger pattern that none of them could see the edges of. Ryder reached down, gripped Ethan's good arm, pulled him to his feet. The man swayed, steadied, set his jaw in the way Ryder remembered, the way Ethan always looked before a mission, not brave but resolved, which was harder and cost more. Can you move? I moved 6 miles through a forest with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder while being chased by men with night vision. I can walk through a door. When we get in there, where's the comms unit? Northeast corner, raised platform, what used to be the foreman's office. They converted it into a tactical operations center. The satellite uplink is mounted on the roof above it. I've seen the dish from the ridge line. Security? 2 to 4 men inside the facility at any given time, rotational. But if the sweep team has been recalled from the shafts, that number could be higher. 12, maybe 15. Of 15 armed operators, Cole said. He was the youngest, 23. His voice carried the particular steadiness of a man who was terrified and had decided to be steady anyway, the way young soldiers do when they realize that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to function despite it. Against 5 of us with handguns. 4, Ethan said. I can't shoot, not with this arm. Outstanding. Cole. Ryder's voice, not sharp, just final, the way a door closing sounds. Nobody has to go through that door. This isn't an order. This isn't a club vote. If anyone wants to go back through that passage and take their chances with the shaft exit, I won't think less of you. I won't say a word. You ride away and forget you were ever on this mountain." Nobody moved. Nobody was going to move. And Ryder knew that because he knew these men the way he knew the weight of his own bike beneath him. By feel, by memory, by the 1,000 small agreements that accumulate between people who have chosen to face the same direction in the dark. Then we do it quiet. Deacon and I go through first. Sullivan takes the south approach. If there's a maintenance corridor, use it. Maddox, Cole, stay with Ethan. If you hear shooting, you don't come in. You take him back through the passage, and you get him off this mountain. The metal matters more than any of us. Ryder, the metal matters more. His voice broke on the word. Not much. Just a crack. A fracture in the surface of a man who had been holding himself together with discipline and grief and the desperate, unkillable hope that something he had lost might still be worth finding. Ethan dies. The evidence survives. That's the math. I don't like it either, but that's the math. Ethan looked at Ryder. The look between them was a conversation that happened below language. Two men who had shared a war, a death that wasn't real, a grief that was, and 15 years of silence that had changed the shape of both their lives in ways neither of them fully understood. Ryder, don't. If I don't say it now, then don't say it now. Say it when we're off this mountain and sitting at a bar somewhere ugly with cheap beer and no cell service. You can say everything you've been saving for 15 years, but not here, not in a mine shaft. You don't get to make this a goodbye. Ethan closed his mouth, nodded once. Ryder turned to the door, put his hand on the metal, felt the cold of it seep into his palm, into his bones, into the place where decisions are made before the mind catches up and calls them by name. He pushed. The door opened onto a catwalk. Below it, the processing floor stretched out like the belly of a dead machine, vast, hollow, lit by emergency strips that cast everything in a green-white glow that made shadows look like living things. The air was different here, warmer, carrying the smell of diesel and hot metal and the indefinable chemical scent of electronics running in an enclosed space. Ryder scanned. Left, conveyor frameworks stripped of their belts, standing like the skeletons of enormous animals. Center, open floor, concrete, oil-stained, with tire marks showing the paths of heavy vehicles. Right. The foreman's office, elevated on a steel platform, its windows covered with blackout material but light bleeding through the seams. 3 vehicles on the floor. Black SUVs. Government style. No plates. 2 men visible. One by the vehicles, checking equipment. One at the base of the foreman's office stairs, standing with the posture of a sentry, feet apart, hands clasped in front, head moving in slow, regular sweeps. Radio chatter from the office above. Muffled. Multiple voices. Deacon leaned close to Ryder's ear. 2 visible. At least 3 in the office. That's 5 minimum. We've got no suppression, no cover on the catwalk, and 30 feet of open ground between the door and anything we can hide behind. I see it. Ryder, this isn't a plan. This is a prayer. Then it's a prayer. They moved along the catwalk. Low. Slow. The metal grating was old and it flexed under their weight, but the generator hum covered the noise. Barely enough. The margin between detection and concealment measured in decibels that could have gone either way. They reached the stairs at the end of the catwalk. Descended. Ryder first. Deacon 2 steps behind. Their boots finding the treads by feel, because looking down meant looking away from the floor, and looking away from the floor meant dying. The first conveyor framework was 12 feet from the base of the stairs. They covered the distance in a crouch, sliding behind rusted steel, pressing themselves into shadows that smelled like old grease and iron oxide. From this position, Ryder could see the sentry more clearly. Former military. Obviously. The way he stood, the way his eyes moved, the economy of motion that came from training so deeply embedded it had become autonomic. Mid-30s, fit, armed, sidearm visible, and the bulge under his left arm suggested a shoulder rig holding something heavier. The man by the vehicles was older, 40-something. He was loading cases into the back of an SUV, hard-sided cases, the kind used for transporting sensitive equipment. or evidence. He worked with the methodical efficiency of someone performing a task he had performed many times before. They're packing up, Ryder realized. They're not setting up operations. They're breaking down. They expect to finish this soon and leave, which meant whatever was on the other side of the foreman's office windows wasn't a tactical operations center. It was a disposal team. The radio in the office crackled. A voice, clear enough to hear from the floor, said words that stopped Ryder's blood. Alpha Team confirms shaft 9 tracks match target plus 5 additional. Repeat, target is not alone. Civilian involvement confirmed. Adjust glass canopy to full containment. No exceptions. No witnesses. No witnesses. 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words and 5 men on a mountain went from being obstacles to being targets, from being inconvenient to being dead, from being bikers who stumbled into someone else's war to being casualties of a conspiracy that had already killed at least 4 people and was about to add their names to the list. Ryder looked at Deacon. In the green emergency light, Deacon's face was stone, but his eyes were not. His eyes were doing the thing that happens when a man who has spent his entire adult life preparing for violence realizes that this is the moment, not a drill, not a scenario, not a what-if discussed over beers in the back of the clubhouse. This. Full containment, Deacon whispered. They're going to kill everyone on this mountain, including the kid. Noah. Back at the trailhead with Hatch. Ryder's mind split. 2 directions, 2 responsibilities. The evidence that could bring down an empire, and a 14-year-old boy sitting on a fallen log in the snow with an old man and a burner phone. Hatch has no signal, Ryder said. They can't call anyone. If Meridian sends a team down to the trailhead, Hatch can handle himself. Against how many? Against operators. Right now, we can't help Hatch. Right now, we can only help the man behind us and the information he's carrying. If we get the transmission out, the game changes. Meridian can't kill witnesses to a story that's already public. And if we don't get the transmission out, then none of us are leaving this mountain at all. Ryder looked at the foreman's office. The satellite uplink was on the roof above it. The chip was in the metal in his pocket. Between him and the transmission was 30 feet of open floor, a sentry, a loader, and at least 3 armed men in an office designed as a tactical command post. He reached into his jacket, pulled the metal free, held it in the green light, turned it over, read the number 1 more time, felt the weight of it. Not the weight of bronze, but the weight of everything it carried. 12 names on a memorial wall, 15 years of silence, a man who had erased himself to protect a truth that nobody wanted to hear. And now a 14-year-old boy with a broken backpack and a habit of collecting lost things was somewhere on this mountain, and the people who had already killed to keep this secret would not hesitate to kill again. Ryder put the metal back in his pocket. He checked his weapon. Full magazine, 1 in the chamber, 14 rounds between him and the end of the world. Deacon. Ready. Sullivan's on the south side. When we move, he'll hear it. He'll come in from behind. If there's a corridor, there's always a corridor. A pause. The generator hummed. The emergency lights pulsed. Somewhere in the distance, deeper in the mountain, the sound of boots echoed through stone. The sweep teams, working closer, tightening the noose. This is the part where you're supposed to say something inspiring, Deacon said. Ryder looked at him, and for the first time since the diner, since Noah had placed a dead man's medal on the counter and changed everything, something like the ghost of a smile crossed Ryder Callahan's face. Don't die. That's it? That's everything. Ryder moved, out from behind the conveyor framework, into the open, into the green light and the diesel air and the space between what he had been and what he was about to become. The sentry saw him first. The man's training kicked in, hand moving to weapon, mouth opening to call. And then Deacon was there, coming from the opposite angle, and Sullivan appeared from a maintenance door on the south wall that nobody had seen him enter. 3 directions, 3 men, moving with the coordinated precision of people who had fought together long enough that planning was unnecessary because their bodies had memorized each other's rhythms the way a heartbeat memorizes its own pattern. The sentry's weapon cleared the holster. Ryder was already too close for it to matter. And on the catwalk above them, Maddox and Cole stood with Ethan between them, watching the processing floor transform from a staging area into a battlefield, knowing that whatever happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether the evidence on that chip ever reached the light, whether the dead would ever have their names spoken in a courtroom instead of whispered at a memorial, whether a 14-year-old boy on a trailhead would see tomorrow morning. The sentry's radio crackled one last time. All units, glass canopy is go, full containment, 0 exceptions. Then the first shot shattered the silence, and the mountain swallowed the sound the way it had swallowed everything else. The truth, the dead, the 15 years of lies, and gave back nothing but echoes. The sentry dropped. Not clean, not quiet. Ryder hit him at full speed, driving his shoulder into the man's chest, and they both crashed into the steel railing at the base of the foreman's stairs. The sentry's weapon discharged into the ceiling, a sharp, flat crack that bounced off every metal surface in the facility and multiplied into a sound like the building itself was breaking apart. Ryder got his hand on the man's wrist, twisted, felt the tendons strain and the grip loosen. The weapon clattered to the concrete. The sentry threw an elbow, hard, trained, aimed at the throat, and Ryder took it on the jaw instead, felt his teeth snap together, tasted copper, and drove his knee upward into the man's ribs with everything he had. The sentry folded. Ryder put him down with a strike to the temple that left his own knuckles split and bleeding. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. That's all it had taken. But 3 seconds was enough for the loader by the SUVs to drop his cases and reach for the rifle propped against the vehicle's rear bumper. Sullivan got there first. He came through the maintenance door like something the building had exhaled, fast, low, soundless until the moment he wasn't. His forearm caught the loader across the throat. The man went backward over the equipment cases, hit the concrete, and Sullivan was on top of him before the rifle finished sliding across the floor. "Don't," Sullivan said. One word. The loader stopped moving. The foreman's office door burst open. 3 men, armed, body armor, moving in a formation that said these were not security contractors playing soldier. These were operators, the real kind, the kind who had spent years in places where the rules of engagement were written in pencil and erased before the ink dried. The first one through the door had his weapon up and sweeping before his boot hit the platform. He found Deacon in his sights. Deacon found him. 2 shots, almost simultaneous, the sounds overlapping into a single violent percussion that shook dust from the overhead beams. The operator's round hit the conveyor framework 6 inches from Deacon's head, spraying rust and metal fragments. Deacon's round hit the operator's vest, center mass, absorbed by the armor, but the impact staggered him backward into the second man and bought Deacon the half-second he needed to move. Ryder was already on the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, his weapon in his hand, his blood on the railing, the sentry's radio crackling against his hip where he'd grabbed it during the takedown. The third operator saw him, pivoted. The barrel of his rifle came around in an arc that would have ended at Ryder's chest if the man had been a quarter-second faster. He wasn't. Ryder fired twice. The first round hit the door frame. The second hit the operator's shoulder above the armor in the gap between the vest and the collar. The man spun. His rifle went wide. He hit the railing and went over it, falling 8 feet to the processing floor with a sound that Ryder heard but didn't process because he was already through the door. The foreman's office was exactly what Ethan had described. Blackout windows, banks of communications equipment lining 3 walls, monitors showing camera feeds, the mine shafts, the access roads, the forest, the trailhead. The trailhead. Ryder saw it on the center monitor, and his heart stopped. 2 SUVs, parked at the base of the logging road, men getting out, armed, moving toward the tree line where Hatch and Noah were waiting. 4 men, moving in pairs. Tactical approach through timber. They'd be at the fallen log where Noah was sitting within 10 minutes. "No," Ryder said. The word came out hoarse, ripped from somewhere below language. "No, no, no!" He grabbed the sentry's radio, keyed it, listened. The frequency was encrypted, but the radio was already synced, the sentry's own unit already paired to Meridian's network. "All units, glass canopy, trailhead team report." A voice came back. Calm, professional. The voice of a man executing a task he considered routine. "Trailhead team in position. 2 civilians confirmed at the primary location. Approaching now." "Abort," Ryder said. He didn't think about it, didn't calculate. The word came out with the force of a man watching a truck roll toward a child and having nothing but his voice between them. Trailhead team, abort approach. Repeat, abort. Silence on the radio. Then, identify. Command element, abort approach at trailhead. Civilian targets are not part of glass canopy. A longer silence. Ryder could hear his own blood in his ears. Could hear Deacon on the processing floor below, shouting something he couldn't make out. Could hear the generator humming its stupid, constant note, indifferent to everything happening around it. Command element, authenticate with daily code. Over. Ryder didn't have the daily code. Of course he didn't. He was holding a dead sentry's radio in an office he'd taken by force, trying to stop an execution he couldn't reach, and the voice on the other end was asking for a password. They're not buying it, Sullivan said from behind him. He'd come up the stairs during the firefight, the loader zip-tied to a pipe on the processing floor below. And now they know someone's in the office. Ryder looked at the monitors. The trailhead team was still moving. Closer now. Maybe 8 minutes from the tree line. He keyed the radio one more time, dropped any pretense of authority or deception. Spoke directly, the way a man speaks when the only tool he has left is the truth. The boy at the trailhead is 14 years old. He found a medal on a trail. That's all he did. He's not part of this. You do what you want with me. But that kid walks away. The radio was silent for 5 seconds. 10. Then, all targets are designated. No exceptions. Glass canopy protocol. Trailhead team. Proceed. Ryder threw the radio across the room. It hit the wall and shattered into plastic fragments that scattered across the floor like teeth. Ryder. Sullivan, at the communications bank. His hands were already moving across the equipment, pulling cables, checking connections. The uplink. It's here. Satellite antenna is active. If we can get the chip data transmitted, how long? To extract the data from the metal, load it, establish the satellite link, transmit to 2 separate recipients? 20 minutes minimum, probably 30. We don't have 30 minutes. We don't have 10. They just broadcast our location to every unit on this mountain, and they're sending a team to kill a kid. Ryder's hands were shaking, not from fear, from the collision of 2 imperatives that could not coexist. The need to transmit the evidence that Ethan had spent 15 years protecting, and the need to get off this mountain and reach the trailhead before the men with rifles reached a 14-year-old boy who collected lost things because it was the only way he knew how to matter. Deacon, Ryder called down to the floor. Status. 3 down, 2 restrained, 1 conscious but not going anywhere. I count 3 rifles, 2 sidearms, 4 magazines. We're armed now, but we're exposed. If reinforcements come through the shaft entrances, we're in a box. Maddox, Cole, bring Ethan down. Movement on the catwalk above. Maddox and Cole helped Ethan down the stairs. The man's face was gray, the color of a body running out of resources, burning through its last reserves the way a candle burns through the wax at the bottom. The flame still alive, but the fuel almost gone. Ethan saw the communications bank. His eyes changed, not brighter, sharper. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight for 15 years and can finally see the place where he might set it down. I can do it faster, Ethan said. The transmission. I've rehearsed this, in my head, 1,000 times. I know the protocols, I know the frequencies, I know exactly what to send and where. How fast? 15 minutes. Maybe 12 if the equipment is configured the way I think it is. You've got 10. Sullivan, help him, whatever he needs. Ryder, what are you doing? Ryder was already moving, back down the stairs, across the processing floor, toward the SUVs that Meridian had so conveniently left with their keys in the ignition, because when you controlled an entire mountain, you didn't worry about theft. Deacon, with me. Where? Trailhead. That's 7 miles down a mountain road in the snow, in a vehicle that probably has a GPS tracker broadcasting our position. Then they'll know exactly where to find me. Ryder climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started. A diesel growl that was nothing like the sound of his bike, but carried the same promise. Motion. Direction. The ability to close the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. Deacon got in the passenger side, checked the rifle he'd taken from the floor, a military-grade weapon. The kind of thing you held and immediately understood was designed with a single purpose and no apologies. Maddox, Cole, Ryder's voice through the open window. You hold this facility. Whatever comes through those doors, you hold it until Ethan gets the transmission out. That is the only thing that matters. Maddox nodded. Cole nodded. Neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that holding a facility against an unknown number of armed operators with 2 handguns and 2 borrowed rifles was not a plan, but a math problem, with an answer nobody wanted to calculate. Ryder put the SUV in gear. The tires screamed on the concrete as he drove through the loading bay doors, shattering them outward into the night air, and the cold hit him like a wall. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since they'd entered the mine. Snow was falling harder now. Not flurries, but accumulation, the kind that turned mountain roads into skating rinks and visibility into a suggestion. The road wound down the east face of the mountain. Narrow, unpaved. The SUV's headlights cut through the snow and illuminated a world that was rapidly losing its features. Trees becoming shapes, rocks becoming shadows, the road itself becoming a guess between the tree line on one side and a drop-off on the other. 7 miles, Deacon said. He was calm. Not performing calm, actually calm, the way certain men become calm when the situation passes the threshold of what can be managed and enters the territory of what can only be survived. 8 minutes if you drive like you're trying to die. I'm trying not to let someone else die. The kid doesn't know what he walked into, Ryder. That's exactly why. The SUV hit a rut, bounced. The back end slid on the snow and Ryder corrected, fighting the wheel, feeling the tires find grip and lose it, and find it again. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm against the glass, back and forth, clearing snow that was replaced before the blades completed their arc. Ryder. What? If we get to the trailhead and they're already there, if the kid is already... Don't. I need to know what we're doing. Are we recovering a body, or are we engaging an armed team in a forest in the dark? We're doing whatever we find when we get there. The road curved, dropped. A switchback that put the SUV's headlights pointing straight out into empty space for one vertiginous second before the turn brought them back to solid ground. Ryder's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His jaw was locked. His eyes burned from the snow glare and the sweat running into them, and the simple savage effort of seeing a road that was trying to disappear. 5 miles. 4. The radio in the SUV, mounted to the dash, Meridian's own communication system, crackled. Trailhead team, contact with civilians, male, elderly, armed, engaging. Hatch. Hatch had a weapon. Hatch was fighting. Second civilian, not at location. Repeat, second civilian, the juvenile, is not at the primary position, searching. Noah had run. Ryder felt something crack open inside his chest. Not relief, because relief was premature and dangerous, but something like it. Something that tasted like the first breath after being held underwater. Noah had run. The boy who collected lost things, who moved through the world like a ghost. Because being invisible was the only survival skill his life had taught him, had heard trouble coming, and had done the one thing his instincts told him to do. He'd disappeared. He's in the forest, Ryder said. He knows those trails. He knows every path within 10 miles of Ash Hollow. So do the men looking for him. Not like he does. Not like a kid who's walked them every morning for years. 3 miles. The road straightened, the grade lessened. The trees began to thin, transitioning from dense timber to the mixed second growth that surrounded the lower elevations. The radio again. Hatch's fight was audible in the background. Shouting, the snap of gunfire, the crash of something heavy. Elderly male is down. Repeat, elderly male is down. Non-lethal. Restrained, searching for juvenile target. Down. Restrained. Not dead. 2 miles. Ryder pushed the accelerator to the floor. The SUV lurched forward, the engine screaming, the tires throwing rooster tails of snow and mud behind them. The vehicle hit a washout in the road and went airborne for a fraction of a second. A weightless, sickening moment where physics took over and human control became a spectator. before slamming back down with a force that cracked something in the suspension and sent a shudder through the entire chassis. "Hold together," Ryder said. To the SUV, to himself. To whatever fragile, impossible chain of events had brought him from a diner counter to a mountain road at night, driving toward a boy he'd met 4 hours ago who had somehow become the most important person on this mountain. 1 mile. The trailhead appeared in the headlights, the parking area, the fallen log where Noah had sat, Hatch's bike, tipped over in the snow. One of Meridian's SUVs, doors open, dome light glowing. 2 men visible, one standing over Hatch, who was face down on the ground with his hands zip-tied behind his back. One at the tree line, flashlight sweeping the forest, searching. Ryder didn't slow down. He drove the SUV straight into the parking area at 40 miles an hour and hit the brakes at the last possible second, the vehicle sliding sideways on the snow and gravel, the headlights sweeping across the scene like searchlights at a prison break. The man standing over Hatch turned, brought his weapon up. Deacon was out of the passenger door before the SUV finished sliding, rifle up, sighted. "Drop it." The man didn't drop it. Deacon fired once. The round hit the ground at the man's feet, throwing gravel. A warning. The kind of warning you give exactly once. Next one doesn't miss. The man's eyes moved, calculated, assessed. He saw the rifle. He saw Deacon's stance. The stance of a man who had made this calculation before and already knew the answer. He dropped his weapon. The second man, the one at the tree line, turned at the sound. His flashlight found Ryder. His hand found his sidearm. Ryder walked toward him. Not running. Walking. The way you walk when you've passed the point where speed matters and entered the territory where presence is the only weapon you have. "Your comms are down," Ryder said. A lie. He didn't know if their comms were down, but the man didn't know that he didn't know. "Your facility is taken, your sweep teams are cut off, and the evidence you're trying to bury is being transmitted to federal investigators right now." The man's hand stayed on his weapon. His face was professional. Blank. The face of someone who had been trained to show nothing and feel less. "I don't know what you're talking about." Glass canopy, Meridian Defense Solutions, Colonel Marcus Vane. 15 years of kill orders and stolen money and dead whistleblowers. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Something moved behind the man's eyes. Not fear, recognition. The recognition of a man hearing his operational security peeled away layer by layer and understanding, in real time, that the walls around his world were coming down. "You're making a mistake," the man said. "I made my mistake 15 years ago when I believed the official report. I'm not making it again." Deacon had the first man restrained. Ryder approached the second. The man's hand was still on his sidearm. The distance between them was 12 feet, far enough to draw, too close to miss. "Think about it," Ryder said. "Really think. The evidence is already gone. Whatever happens here doesn't change that. You shoot me, the transmission still goes through. You run, the transmission still goes through. The only question is whether you spend the rest of your life in a cell or the rest of your night zip-tied to a tree. Those are your options. There are no others." The man's hand came off the weapon, slowly, finger by finger, the way a man releases something he doesn't want to let go of but has run out of reasons to hold. Ryder took the sidearm, took the man's radio, put him on the ground next to his partner and zip-tied them both with the same kind of restraints they'd used on Hatch. "Hatch." Ryder was on his knees, cutting the old man's restraints. "Hatch, talk to me." The old man rolled onto his back. His face was bloodied, but split lip, a cut above his eye, the kind of damage that comes from being hit by someone who knows where to hit. But his eyes were clear, alert, angry in the particular way of a man who has been through worse and is mostly offended by the inconvenience. "They came fast," Hatch said. "2 vehicles. I got Noah into the trees before they reached us. Told him to run. Told him not to stop." "How long ago?" 20 minutes, maybe 25. He went north, up the trail." "The North Fork Trail?" "He said he knew a place. Said he goes there when he needs to hide." Ryder looked at the forest. Dark, snow-covered. 1,000 places a 14-year-old boy could be crouched in the cold, alone, terrified, listening for footsteps that might be rescue, or might be the people who had come to make sure he never told anyone what he'd found on a trail that morning. "Noah!" Ryder's voice cracked the silence like a rifle shot. It echoed off the trees and came back to him empty. "Noah, it's Ryder. It's safe. You can come out." Nothing. "He won't come," Hatch said. "Not to a shout. Not after what he just saw. That kid has spent his whole life learning that loud voices mean danger. He's not going to trust a shout in the dark." Ryder closed his eyes, opened them, stood. He walked to the tree line, stepped past it, into the forest, into the dark and the snow and the cold and the silence that had swallowed a boy the same way the mountain had swallowed Ethan, completely, without mercy, without sound. He walked the North Fork Trail, slowly, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, not hiding his approach, not moving like a soldier, moving like a man walking through a house looking for a child who's hidden because the world has taught him that hiding is the safest thing he knows. Noah. Quieter now, not a shout, a voice. "It's Ryder. The men are gone. I need you to come to my voice. I need you to trust me, even though I know that's hard. I know trusting people is hard for you. I know that because it's hard for me too." He walked. The snow fell around him. The forest breathed its cold, pine-scented breath. "I found something today too, Noah. Same as you. I found something someone lost a long time ago. Something I thought was gone forever. And a kid I'd never met walked up to me in a diner and gave it back to me. Just like that. Because that's what he does. He picks up things people lose, and he tries to make them matter." His voice was breaking. He let it break. There was no point in holding it together now. Not here. Not in the dark. Not with the snow falling and the mountain above him full of tunnels and ghosts and the wreckage of a conspiracy that had taken 15 years to surface. "You matter, Noah. You mattered before you found that metal. You'll matter after tonight. And I am not leaving this forest without you." Silence. Then a sound. Small. Close. The sound of a breath being released. The kind of breath a person holds when they're hiding and finally decides to stop. He was 8 feet away, behind a fallen Douglas fir pressed into a hollow in the root ball, his jacket pulled over his head, his body curled into the smallest shape a 14-year-old boy could make. Snow had accumulated on his shoulders. His face was pale. His eyes were enormous. "Are they gone?" Noah whispered. "They're gone. The old man, Hatch, he's okay. He's tough. I heard shooting from the mountain. I thought, I know what you thought. You were wrong. We're okay." Noah didn't move. He stayed in his hollow, looking up at Ryder with the expression of a creature deciding whether to trust the hand reaching toward it. "My mom doesn't know where I am," Noah said. His voice cracked on the word mom in a way that stripped away everything. The bravery, the composure, the quiet toughness that had carried him through this day, and left nothing but a 14-year-old boy who was cold and scared and wanted his mother. Ryder knelt, held out his hand. "Then let's get you home." Noah reached up, took Ryder's hand. The grip was cold and small and shaking, and Ryder closed his fingers around it and held on with the same desperate certainty he'd held the metal, like something recovered from the wreckage of a day that had tried to take everything from him and had failed. They walked back to the trailhead. Deacon had both Meridian operators secured and Hatch on his feet, leaning against a tree, pressing snow against his split lip with the resigned patience of a man who'd had worse and expected worse again. The radio in the captured SUV crackled. "Facility team, respond. Status on the asset." Ryder grabbed the radio, listened, didn't respond. "Facility team, be advised. Alpha and Bravo squads converging on processing level. 6 minutes. Maddox and Cole. Ethan, Sullivan. 6 minutes." Ryder looked at Deacon. The same calculation passed between them. Instantaneous, wordless, the kind of math that men who fought together can do without speaking because they've been solving the same equation their entire lives. They couldn't get back up the mountain in time. The road was 7 miles of switchbacks in the snow. 6 minutes was impossible. But the transmission, if Ethan had started the moment they left, if Sullivan had helped him configure the uplink, if the equipment worked, If the 15 years of preparation and rehearsal and desperate hope had been enough. 12 minutes, Ethan had said. Maybe 10. They'd been gone 11. Ryder keyed the radio, not the meridian frequency. His own phone pulled from his pocket, held up to the sky, searching for signal. One bar, flickering, barely there, the last thin thread connecting this trailhead to the outside world. He dialed. The number Sullivan had given him before they split. Sullivan's personal phone. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Sullivan picked up. "Tell me," Ryder said. Gunfire in the background. The unmistakable sound of a firefight, sharp, percussive, echoing through the cavernous space of the processing floor. Shouting, the clang of metal, the deeper boom of something structural giving way. Then Sullivan's voice strained but intact. "Transmission is at 92%. Ethan's still at the console. Maddox and Cole are holding the east entrance. They're coming in from 2 directions. We've got maybe 3 minutes before they're on us." "The transmission, Sullivan. Will it finish?" More gunfire. Closer now. Sullivan's breathing was ragged. The sound of a man fighting and talking at the same time, splitting his attention between the weapon in his hand and the phone against his ear. "It'll finish. If we hold. 2 minutes. Maybe less." "Hold. We're holding." The line didn't go dead. Ryder held the phone to his ear and listened to the sound of his brothers fighting for their lives on a mountain he couldn't reach, in a facility he couldn't see, defending a man he'd thought was dead, and an act of truth that had waited 15 years for this exact moment. He heard Maddox shout something, heard Cole respond, heard the sharp crack of rifle fire answered by the heavier boom of something automatic, heard Ethan's voice, thin, wrecked, but steady, counting out numbers that meant nothing to anyone except the machine he was feeding them to. 96%, 97. And then a sound, different from the gunfire, different from the fighting, a sound that came from above, from the sky, from the air, from outside the mountain entirely. Rotors, the deep rhythmic thud of helicopter blades cutting through snow-heavy air. Not one, multiple. The sound growing, building, swelling until it filled the valley and bounced off the mountains and made the trees shudder and the snow swirl in horizontal sheets. Ryder looked up. Lights. Moving fast. Coming from the south. Searchlights sweeping the forest, the road, the trailhead, turning the falling snow into a blinding curtain of white. Deacon raised his weapon. Instinct. Training. A man's first response to aircraft in a combat zone is always the same. Identify the threat, find cover, prepare. But these weren't meridians. The markings were visible as the first helicopter banked low over the trailhead, its spotlight pinning Ryder where he stood. Federal markings. Law enforcement. The letters on the fuselage were clear even through the snow. "Ryder," Sullivan's voice on the phone, barely audible now over the rotor wash. "Transmission complete. 100%. Both recipients confirmed. The Inspector General's office and the..." Static. Gunfire. Then silence. Then Sullivan, one last time. "It's done, Ryder. It's out. They can't bury it now." The phone went dead. Ryder stood in the trailhead parking lot with helicopters circling above him and snow swirling around him, and a 14-year-old boy gripping his hand and an old biker pressing snow to his bleeding face, and 2 bound mercenaries on the ground, and the sound of his brother's last stand echoing through a phone that had gone silent. The metal was in his pocket. The evidence was in the air. The truth was moving through satellite signals and fiber optic cables to desks, where people with subpoena power would open files that should have been opened 15 years ago. And on the mountain above him, in the green-lit belly of a facility built on lies, the men who had ridden with him since dawn were either alive or they weren't, and he couldn't reach them, and he couldn't help them, and he couldn't do anything except stand in the snow and hold a boy's hand and wait for the world to catch up with the truth that Ethan Cross had carried alone for 15 years. The first helicopter landed. Armed agents spilled out into the snow, voices shouting orders, flashlights crisscrossing the dark. Ryder didn't move. Noah looked up at him. "Is it over?" Ryder looked at the mountain, at the snow, at the helicopters wheeling above the peak like mechanical birds of prey, their searchlights probing the mine entrances where his brothers were fighting or fallen or holding the line until someone arrived to tell them the war was finally finished. "Not yet," Ryder said. His hand tightened around Noah's. The snow kept falling, and the mountain kept its silence. The federal agents reached the processing facility at 11:47 p.m. Ryder knew the exact time because he was standing in the trailhead parking lot staring at the clock on the dashboard of the captured SUV when the radio, the one the agents had commandeered and patched into Meridian's frequency, crackled with the words he'd been waiting 43 minutes to hear. "Processing level secured. 4 civilians located, 3 ambulatory, 1 critical, requesting immediate medevac. 4 civilians, 3 ambulatory, 1 critical." The math was simple. Maddox, Cole, Sullivan. Those were 3. The 4th was Ethan. And critical meant alive, which meant not dead, which meant the man who had survived 15 years underground had survived 1 more night. But critical also meant something else. Ryder felt Deacon's hand on his shoulder. Not a grip, just a placement. The weight of a palm that said, "I'm here," without requiring a response. "Which one?" Ryder said to the radio. "To nobody. To the mountain." The answer came from the sky. 2 medevac helicopters descended toward the peak, their rotors cutting the snow into spiral patterns that looked, from below, like the mountain was exhaling its last breath. They wouldn't let Ryder go up. The agents, professional, calm, doing their jobs, explained that the facility was an active crime scene, that the mine shafts were unsecured, that armed Meridian personnel were still being located and detained in the tunnel network. They explained this with the patient, practiced tone of people who had been trained to manage civilians in crisis situations, and Ryder listened to every word and understood none of them because language had stopped functioning as anything other than noise. He waited. Noah sat beside him on the tailgate of the SUV, wrapped in a thermal blanket one of the agents had given him. The boy hadn't spoken since the helicopters arrived. He sat with his knees pulled up and his arms around them, making himself small in the way Ryder had learned to recognize. The posture of a person who had spent so much of his life being insignificant that shrinking had become instinctive, a reflex as automatic as blinking. Hatch sat on the other side, his face cleaned and bandaged by a field medic, his white beard stained pink in places where the blood hadn't fully washed out. He smoked a cigarette he'd bummed from one of the agents and watched the helicopters with the detached patience of a man who had waited for worse news in worse places and knew that waiting was the only part of this he could control. At 12:31 a.m., the first medevac descended from the peak and landed in the field beyond the parking lot. The rotors hadn't stopped turning when the rear door opened and a stretcher emerged, carried by 2 medics moving with the controlled urgency that meant serious but stable. Sullivan walked beside the stretcher. His left arm was in a sling. His face was cut in 2 places, and his jacket was torn across the chest, exposing the body armor he'd taken from one of the downed operators. Armor that, judging by the dent above the heart, had done exactly what it was designed to do. On the stretcher was Ethan Cross. Ryder was there before the medics reached the ambulance. He didn't ask permission. He simply appeared at the stretcher's side the way gravity appears when you step off a ledge. Inevitable, immediate, not subject to negotiation. Ethan's eyes were closed. An IV ran into his right arm. An oxygen mask covered the lower half of his face. The makeshift sling on his left arm had been replaced with a proper immobilization device, and beneath the thermal blanket covering his body, Ryder could see the bulk of bandaging around his torso where the broken ribs had finally been addressed by someone with actual medical training. "He collapsed at the console," Sullivan said. His voice was hoarse. "Smoke or shouting or both." "Finished the transmission. Confirmed both recipients received the full data package." Then his legs went and he was down. Maddox caught him before he hit the floor. "How bad?" "Ribs punctured something. Internal bleeding. The medic stabilized him, but he needs a hospital, a real one, not a field tent." Ryder looked at Ethan's face. The oxygen mask fogged and cleared with each breath. Irregular but present, the stubborn mechanical rhythm of a body that had been ordered to quit 1,000 times and had refused every single one. "Ethan." The eyes opened, slowly, the way eyes open when the lids weigh more than the will behind them, but the will wins anyway. Transmission, Ethan said. The word was muffled by the mask but audible. The first word he spoke wasn't about pain or fear or the 15 years of silence that had led to this moment. It was about the mission, the evidence, the thing he had sacrificed his entire life to protect. Complete, Ryder said. Both recipients. Sullivan confirmed. Ethan's eyes closed again. But not the same way they'd closed before. Before they had closed from exhaustion, the surrender of a body that had nothing left. Now they closed from something else. Relief. The particular kind of relief that comes when a weight you've been carrying so long it became part of your skeleton is finally set down, and the sensation of its absence is so foreign it feels like floating. I need you to hold on, Ryder said. That's an order. You can't order me. I outranked you. You outranked me 15 years ago. Now you're a dead man on a stretcher. I outrank everyone. The ghost of something, not a smile, something smaller and more real than a smile, crossed Ethan's face beneath the mask. Stay with me, Ryder said. Already told you. I've been staying with you for 15 years. The medics moved the stretcher into the ambulance. The doors closed. The vehicle pulled away, chains on its tires biting into the snow-covered road, taillights shrinking into the dark until they were just two red points in a world of white, and then nothing. Ryder stood in the parking lot. The snow fell on him. He didn't move. Sullivan stood beside him. Maddox and Cole came down on the second medevac, walking under their own power. Maddox had a bandage on his forearm, a graze, shallow, the kind of wound that bled dramatically but healed in weeks. Cole was untouched physically, but his eyes had the particular distance of a man who had just been in his first real firefight and was processing the difference between training and reality, which was the same as the difference between reading about drowning and being held underwater. Maddox, Ryder said. Yeah. Cole. Here. You held. We held. Ryder nodded, didn't say more. The words that needed to be said about what these men had done, standing in a green-lit facility with borrowed weapons against operators who outnumbered and outgunned them, holding a line that existed for no reason except the belief that the man at the console behind them deserved the 12 minutes it took to transmit the truth. Those words would come later. Or they wouldn't come at all, because some things exist beyond the reach of language and are better honored by silence than diminished by speech. The night dissolved into procedure. Federal agents processed the scene. Meridian personnel were extracted from the tunnels one by one, 11 in total, plus 4 from the trailhead and the processing floor. They were loaded into transport vehicles with the quiet efficiency of a system that knew how to absorb people and make them disappear through proper channels instead of improper ones. Ryder gave his statement. Deacon gave his. Sullivan, Maddox, Cole, Hatch. Each man sat in the back of a federal vehicle with a recorder and an agent and told the story from his own angle. And the angles, when assembled, formed a picture that was larger and darker and more damning than any single perspective could have captured. Noah gave his statement last. He sat in the back seat of an agent sedan with the thermal blanket still around his shoulders and the door open so the cold air could reach him because he said closed spaces made it hard to breathe. He spoke quietly, carefully, the way a boy speaks when he understands, for the first time, that the words coming out of his mouth are being recorded and will be read by people who will make decisions based on them. He told them about the trail, the metal, the footprints, the blood, the diner. He told them about Ryder's face when he saw the metal. He told them about riding on the back of a motorcycle for the first time in his life, holding on to a stranger who didn't feel like a stranger, heading up a mountain toward something neither of them could see. At 3:17 a.m., an agent drove Noah home. Ryder followed on Hatch's bike. The old man's injuries had been deemed too severe for riding, and Hatch had handed over his keys with the grim reluctance of a man surrendering a limb. The bike was older than most of the club's machines, maintained with obsessive precision, its engine turning over with the deep, even rumble of a heart that had been beating for decades and intended to beat for decades more. The ride to Noah's house took 12 minutes. The roads were empty. The snow had slowed to a fine, crystalline dust that hung in the headlight beam like static on a dead channel. The town of Ash Hollow was asleep, utterly, completely, the sleep of a place that had no idea what had happened on the mountain above it and would wake tomorrow to find that the world had changed while it wasn't looking. Noah's house was small, single story. The porch light was on, the only light on the entire street, as if the house itself had been waiting. The front door opened before the agent's sedan came to a complete stop. A woman stood in the doorway. Thin, mid-30s but wearing the face of someone older, the way grief ages people from the inside out, rearranging the architecture of their features around a weight that never lifts. She was wearing a robe and slippers, and her hair was uncombed and her eyes were raw from crying, and she came off that porch like a woman walking into traffic to save her child, which was exactly what she was. Noah, where have you... I woke up and you were gone and I called and nobody... Noah walked into his mother's arms and disappeared. Not physically. This boy was already taller than she was, but in every other way that mattered, he ceased to be the quiet, steady, impossibly brave person who had walked through this night and became what he was. A kid, a 14-year-old kid who needed his mom. She held him. He let her. The agent spoke to her in low tones, explaining enough to justify Noah's absence without explaining everything, because everything would come later, in daylight, in offices, in the slow machinery of a process that would take months to unfold. Ryder watched from the street. He sat on Hatch's bike with the engine idling, the exhaust curling white in the cold air, his hands on the grips, his body aching in places he hadn't noticed until the adrenaline left and the damage announced itself. Split knuckles, bruised jaw, a deep soreness in his shoulder from carrying Ethan's weight through the tunnel, and beneath all of it, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had been running on purpose and fury for 12 hours and was now running on nothing. Noah's mother looked up, saw Ryder, her arms tightened around her son. The instinct was visible. The instinct to protect, to shield, to put herself between her child and the leather-clad stranger sitting on a motorcycle in the dark outside her house. Noah said something to her. Ryder couldn't hear the words, but he saw the woman's face change. The fear didn't leave. Fear like hers didn't leave. It just moved to a different room, but something else entered alongside it. Understanding, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the bewildered recognition that the world is occasionally more complicated than the simple categories of safe and dangerous that we use to navigate it. She nodded at Ryder. Once. A small motion. An acknowledgement across 40 feet of snow-covered road that contained everything that needed to be said and nothing that could have been spoken. Ryder nodded back. Then he rode away. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were slow, methodical. The unsexy grinding work of a system finally doing what it should have done 15 years earlier. The evidence on Ethan's chip was everything he said it was and more. The Inspector General's office opened a multi-agency investigation within 72 hours of receiving the transmission. The investigative outlet, a small, tenacious operation that had been working the edges of defense contractor corruption for years, published the first story within a week. The story named names. It named Colonel Marcus Vane. It named 2 members of a Senate Oversight Committee. It named the CEO of Meridian Defense Solutions and 11 subordinates across military, intelligence, and corporate structures. The story named the dead. David Watts, Catherine Aldridge, Raymond Cho, Billy Kane, 12 servicemen at Firebase Kestrel, people whose deaths had been filed under acceptable losses, equipment failures, suicides, natural causes. The bureaucratic vocabulary of erasure, the language used to make murder look like paperwork. Vane was arrested at his home in Virginia on a Tuesday morning. He was eating breakfast. The agents who took him into custody reported that he said nothing during the arrest. He didn't ask what the charges were. He didn't protest. He didn't cry. He sat in the back of the vehicle with his hands cuffed in front of him and stared out the window as the life he had built on other people's graves receded behind him like a landscape viewed from a departing train. The senators resigned within the month. The CEO of Meridian was indicted on 43 counts. The company's assets were frozen. Its facilities, including the mining complex above Ash Hollow, were seized and shuttered. Ethan Cross spent 6 weeks in a hospital. 2 surgeries. One for the internal bleeding from the rib puncture. One for the shoulder that he had set himself in a mine shaft and that had healed wrong in the hours since. He was listed under a false name for the first 3 weeks. a precaution that the investigating agents insisted on until the scope of the arrest made it clear that the network capable of reaching him had been dismantled. Ryder visited every day. He drove 2 hours each way. Didn't ride. The roads between Ash Hollow and the hospital were winter roads now, snow-packed and salted, and the bike stayed in the garage of the clubhouse while Ryder drove a borrowed truck with a heater that worked intermittently and a radio that picked up exactly one station, which played country music from a decade he didn't recognize. The visits were quiet. They sat. They drank bad hospital coffee. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of absence, the vast, empty space where a person used to be. It was the silence of presence, the silence of two men sitting in the same room, breathing the same air, existing in the same moment after 15 years of occupying separate versions of reality. On the third week, Ethan said, "I watched you dig." Ryder set down his coffee. "At Kestrel. I was in the tree line, 200 meters. I could see you through the smoke. You were on your knees in the rubble. Your hands were bleeding. Someone was trying to pull you out, and you kept going back in. I was looking for you. I know. And you were right there. I know. And you left. Yes. I need you to understand something." Ryder's voice was even, not controlled, settled, the voice of a man who had processed something that couldn't be processed and had arrived at a place that wasn't acceptance and wasn't forgiveness, but was something else, something that existed in the territory between the two, where adults who have suffered learn to build functional lives on imperfect ground. "I understand why you did it. I believe you did it for the right reasons. I believe you saved lives, maybe mine, maybe others. But I need you to understand that understanding why you did it doesn't make the 15 years go away. It doesn't undo the nights. It doesn't undo the guilt. It doesn't undo sitting in your mother's kitchen telling her you were gone. My mother. I was the one who told her, Ethan. I drove to her house. I sat at her table. And I told her that her son was dead. I watched her face while I said it. That face has been in my head for 15 years. It's there right now." Ethan was quiet for a long time. The hospital sounds filled the space. The hum of monitors, the distant clatter of a cart in the hallway, the muffled conversation of nurses changing shift. "Is she alive?" "She's alive. She's in a care facility in Bakersfield. She has good days and bad days. The bad days are more frequent." "Does she know?" "The agents contacted her when you were admitted. Ethan, I don't know how much she understood. The staff said she cried. She held the phone and cried, and then she asked them to bring her a photograph from her room, and it was a photograph of you at 18 in your dress uniform. She slept holding it." Ethan turned his face to the window. The gesture was as close to privacy as a man in a hospital bed could achieve. The turning away, the refusal to let another person see the specific configuration of pain that some information produces when it arrives decades too late. Ryder didn't look away. He didn't give Ethan the courtesy of pretending he hadn't seen it, because that was the deal now. The deal between them was truth, however ugly, however sharp, however much it cost to hold. "I'll take you to see her," Ryder said. "When you're out. I'll drive you myself." Ethan nodded, still facing the window, still holding something in his face that he didn't want the room to see. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You owe me 15 years of bad hospital coffee. We'll start counting from today." Spring came to Ash Hollow the way spring comes to forgotten places. Slowly, reluctantly, as if the season wasn't sure the town deserved it. The snow melted. The creeks ran high. The trails that Noah walked every morning turned to mud, and then to packed earth, and then to the soft, yielding ground of a landscape waking up after a long, hard sleep. The memorial was Hatch's idea. Not a monument, not a plaque on a building, something smaller, simpler. A stone bench at the trailhead where the North Fork Trail began, with a bronze plate set into the surface. The plate listed 12 names, the men who died at Firebase Kestrel, and beneath the names, a single line: they were never forgotten. The ceremony was small, the Iron Vigil Motorcycle Club. A handful of agents who had worked the case, the families of some of the fallen, not all, because time had scattered people the way wind scatters seeds, and not everyone could be found or wanted to be found. Noah stood beside Ryder. He was wearing a new jacket, not new from a store, new from the club, leather, simple, no patches, no insignia, nothing that marked him as a member because he wasn't a member. He was 14 years old. But the jacket was real, and it fit. And when Ryder had given it to him that morning at the diner over breakfast, the boy had held it in his hands the way he held everything he found, carefully, as if the act of receiving something you hadn't expected was itself a kind of responsibility. "You don't have to wear it," Ryder had said. "I want to." "It's just a jacket." "No, it's not." Noah was right. It was not just a jacket. It was the same thing the medal had been, the same thing the bench was, the same thing the transmission from the satellite uplink had been. It was proof. Proof that someone had seen him. Proof that the things he picked up, and the things he carried, and the things he did in the quiet margins of the world mattered to someone besides himself. Ethan stood on the other side of the bench. He was thinner than he'd been. The hospital had done what hospitals do: repaired the mechanical damage, addressed the acute failures, sent him back into the world with prescriptions and follow-up appointments, and the implicit assumption that the rest of the healing was his responsibility. He leaned on a cane. His left arm still didn't move right. His eyes still carried the sunken, over-alert quality of a man who had spent 15 years sleeping in 2-hour intervals and hadn't yet learned to trust the dark. But he was standing, in daylight, under his own name. For the first time in 15 years, Ethan Cross existed as a publicly acknowledged human being. Hatch read the names. 12 names. 12 men. Each one spoken aloud the way a name should be spoken, with weight, with intention, with the understanding that a name is the only part of a person that survives everything. When the last name was read, nobody moved. The forest was quiet. The creek ran its spring current over rocks that had been there longer than anything else on this mountain. A bird called from somewhere in the canopy, a simple, meaningless song that existed for no reason except that the world, despite everything that had been done to it and in it and by it, was still producing beauty without being asked. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out the medal. Ryder had returned it to him the day he left the hospital, cleaned and polished. The microchip removed and entered into federal evidence. It was just bronze now. Just metal and ribbon and a number on the back that meant nothing to anyone except the 2 men who had carried it at different times and for different reasons and at different costs. He set the medal on the bench, beside the names. "It belongs here," Ethan said, "with them." Noah looked at the medal, then at Ryder, then at Ethan, then back at the medal. "Can I?" Noah said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ethan nodded. Noah picked up the medal, turned it over, read the number, felt the weight of it. Different now, lighter, not because the bronze had changed, but because the burden it carried had been transferred to other hands, proper hands, the hands of a system that was finally, belatedly, doing what it should have done all along. He placed it back on the bench, carefully. The way he placed everything, every rusted spike, every broken compass, every discarded piece of someone else's passing, with attention, with intention, with the quiet conviction that lost things deserve to be found, and that finding them is not a small act, but the largest one available to most people most of the time. Ryder watched the boy. He thought about the diner, about a thin voice saying, "Excuse me," to a man who had walked in carrying 15 years of grief on a frame built for war, about the medal landing on the counter between a cup of coffee and the rest of his life. He thought about what Hatch had said at the trailhead, a lifetime ago, in the snow, that waiting is harder than fighting. He thought about Ethan in the tunnel, saying, "I've been staying with you for 15 years. You just didn't know it." He thought about Noah's mother standing on the porch in her robe, nodding once across 40 feet of road. One nod, everything contained. "Ryder," Ethan's voice beside him. "Yeah, I owe you something. You owe me 15 years of coffee. I'm keeping count. I owe you more than coffee. I owe you a reason. A real one. Not the mission. Not the evidence. Not the operational necessity. The real reason I survived." Ryder looked at him. "The night before Kestrel, when I gave you the medal, I said if I don't come back, melt it down and make a bullet. You remember what you said? I told you to stop being dramatic. Before that, Ryder was quiet. You said, "You're coming back because I'm not finished arguing with you." And I spent 15 years in basements, in storage units, in the dark, holding on to that sentence. Not because it was profound, because it was ordinary, because it was the kind of thing one person says to another when they assume there will be a tomorrow. And I needed to believe there would be a tomorrow, even when there wasn't one, even when every day was the same day repeated in different rooms with different names. That sentence was my tomorrow. Ryder didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Some moments are complete without language. They exist in the space between two people who have shared something that can't be communicated to anyone who wasn't there, and the sharing itself is the communication, and the silence that follows is not empty but full. The way a room is full after a song ends and the sound is gone, but the shape of it remains. They stood at the bench. The sun came through the trees. The creek ran. The bird sang its purposeless song. Noah zipped his jacket. The leather creaked. New leather. Stiff, not yet shaped to the body inside it. It would take time. It would take miles. It would take mornings on the trail and evenings in the diner and the slow, patient accumulation of days that eventually turn a jacket from something you wear into something you are. Ryder put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, Noah." The same words he'd said in the diner, a lifetime ago. But different now. Heavier. Loaded with everything that had happened between the first time and this time. The mountain, the mine, the snow, the metal, the transmission, the night, the waiting. The slow unraveling of a lie that had lasted 15 years and ended because a 14-year-old boy picked up something that someone had lost and brought it to the right person. Noah looked up at him and smiled. Not a big smile, not a dramatic, cinematic, everything is fixed smile. A small one. Real. The smile of a kid who had spent his entire life collecting lost things and had finally, for the first time, found something he didn't have to put in a shoebox under his bed. A place where he mattered. They walked back to the bikes. The engines started, one by one, in sequence, the way they always did. The sound filled the valley. Not a roar. A rumble. Deep and steady and certain. The sound of men who had been through something together and were still here, still riding, still pointed in the same direction. Ryder rode lead. Ethan sat behind Deacon, the cane strapped to the saddlebag, his good arm around Deacon's waist, his face turned into the wind with an expression that Ryder caught in his side mirror and recognized. The expression of a man feeling the air on his skin and knowing, for the first time in 15 years, that nobody was chasing him. Noah rode with Hatch. The old man's ribs were still taped, and he winced every time the bike hit a bump, and he rode 20 miles under the speed limit, and he didn't care, and nobody behind him cared either because there was nowhere to be and nothing to run from, and the road stretched ahead of them like a sentence that didn't need to end. They rode through Ash Hollow, past the gas station, past the post office that was open 3 days a week, past Mabel's diner, where Diane stood in the window with a coffee pot in her hand and watched 7 motorcycles roll through her town and didn't wave because she wasn't the waving type, but she did something she almost never did. She smiled. The convoy reached the edge of town. The road opened up. The valley spread out below them, green now, spring-washed, the kind of landscape that makes you understand why people settle in places the rest of the world forgets. Because forgotten places are quiet, and quiet is where healing happens. Not in hospitals, not in courtrooms, not in the headlines that had been running for weeks about defense contractor corruption and fallen officers and a man who had been dead for 15 years and wasn't. In quiet, in the sound of engines on an empty road, in the weight of a hand on a shoulder, in the creak of new leather on a boy who finally had somewhere to belong. Ryder opened the throttle. The engine answered. The road pulled him forward. Behind him, his brothers. Beside them, a ghost who had come back to life. Among them, a boy who had changed everything by doing the smallest thing in the world, picking up something someone lost and bringing it home.